I am Natasha Winters. I am 57 years old, and this is my true story from Chicago. If my regular evening rideshare driver had not taken an unusual detour that cold November night, I would have walked directly into my townhouse and straight into a nightmare I was never supposed to escape. But before I tell you about that night, before I explain how a cup of coffee and a woman's intuition saved my life, I need to take you back to the beginning. Back to the moment when everything I knew about safety, about trust, about the invisibility of danger began to unravel. 8 months before that terrifying November night, I stood in the oncology ward of Northwestern Memorial Hospital, holding my wife's hand as the machines that had been breathing for her finally went silent. Rebecca had been my world for 34 years. We met during a protest rally at the University of Illinois in 1986. She was studying architecture, sketching building designs in the margins of her protest signs. I was pursuing journalism, armed with a camera and notebooks, documenting everything. We fell in love over late-night debates about urban renewal, social justice, and whether Chicago deep dish could really be called pizza. We married young, barely 23, in a small ceremony at her parents' backyard in Evanston. We bought a condo in Lincoln Park when the neighborhood was still affordable, filled it with second-hand furniture and big dreams. We planned to change the world together, one story, one building at a time. Rebecca designed community centers and affordable housing. I worked as an investigative journalist for a small independent newspaper, covering local corruption and housing discrimination. Then our daughter Emma was born, and our world reorganized itself around her laughter, her questions, her belief that her mothers could fix anything. We attended every school play, every soccer game, every parent-teacher conference. We taught her to question authority, to stand up for others, to never accept injustice as inevitable. But life has a way of dismantling certainty. The newspaper I worked for folded when I was 48. Print journalism was dying, swallowed by the internet and corporate consolidation. I took a position as a legal assistant at a corporate law firm, trading my reporter's instincts for document filing and calendar management. The pay was better. The work was soul-crushing. Rebecca never complained about my career shift, but I saw the disappointment in her eyes when I came home exhausted from shuffling papers instead of changing minds. Then, 3 years ago, Rebecca started feeling tired. Just tired, she said. We blamed stress, blamed age, blamed everything except what it actually was. By the time the doctors found the cancer, it had already spread. Stage 4 pancreatic cancer. The oncologist gave her 12 to 18 months. She lived for 18 months exactly, as if she had negotiated one final deadline. I held her hand through every chemo session, every radiation treatment, every moment when hope flickered and died and somehow rekindled itself. We sold the Lincoln Park condo to pay for experimental treatments insurance would not cover. We maxed out credit cards, borrowed from retirement accounts, mortgaged our future for a few more months of her present. When Rebecca died on that February morning, the medical bills were still arriving. The funeral costs consumed what little remained in our accounts. I was 57 years old, widowed, broke, and so hollowed out by grief that some mornings I forgot to breathe. Emma lived in Seattle with her husband Marcus and their 2 children, 7-year-old Sophie and 4-year-old James. She flew in for the funeral, stayed for a week, then returned to her own life. We talked every Sunday, but the conversations felt strained, like we were both trying to comfort each other from opposite sides of a wall we did not know how to scale. Grief had created a distance between us that geography only amplified. I moved into a small townhouse in Bronzeville, a historically black neighborhood on Chicago's South Side. The area had history, character, and soul, but my particular street felt forgotten by the city. Streetlights flickered and died without being replaced. Sidewalks cracked under winter ice and remained broken through summer heat. My townhouse was narrow, built in the 1920s, with drafty windows and pipes that groaned in the cold. But it was mine, or it would be if I could keep making the mortgage payments. Retirement was not an option. Social Security would not be enough. Rebecca's pension had died with her. I needed work immediately. Through a former colleague from my journalism days, a woman named Patricia, who had transitioned into corporate compliance, I found a position as a night auditor at a private document management firm called Sentinel Archives. The company specialized in storing and managing sensitive corporate records, legal documents, and compliance files for mid-sized businesses that could not afford their own secure facilities. Banks, law firms, medical practices, and corporate offices paid Sentinel to maintain their archives with strict chain-of-custody protocols. My job was to work the night shift, verifying that physical documents matched digital backups, flagging discrepancies, and ensuring that every file could be accounted for if auditors or lawyers came calling. It was tedious, solitary work that required meticulous attention to detail. Perfect for someone who did not want to talk to anyone, who needed to focus on something other than the suffocating silence of an empty house. The pay was modest but steady, just enough to cover my mortgage, utilities, and the medication I took for anxiety that had appeared like an unwanted guest after Rebecca's death. My shift ran from 7 in the evening until 2 in the morning. For the first few months, I took the L train home, catching the Red Line south and transferring to a bus that dropped me 3 blocks from my townhouse. Then in September, the CTA announced service cuts. Budget shortfalls, they said. The last train now departed before my shift ended. The bus route was eliminated entirely. Walking through downtown Chicago at 2 in the morning was not something my aging knees or my frayed nerves could handle. Emma insisted I download a rideshare app. "Mom, you cannot walk home alone at that hour," she said during one of our Sunday calls. "Please, just use the app, for me." I resisted. I did not like the idea of strangers, of climbing into unknown cars, of depending on technology I barely understood. But when the first genuinely cold night arrived in late September, when the wind cut through my coat and my knees ached from standing all day, I finally downloaded the app. That is how I met Camila Rodriguez. The first time her silver Honda hatchback pulled up outside the Sentinel Archives building, I hesitated on the sidewalk. It was nearly 2:30 in the morning. The street was empty, except for a few scattered souls hurrying toward warmth, and the occasional police car cruising past. The app showed her photograph, her license plate, and her rating. 5 perfect stars across 847 trips. Camila looked to be in her mid-40s, with dark curly hair pulled into a messy bun, and warm brown eyes that crinkled when she smiled at me through the passenger window. She wore a puffy jacket and had a rosary hanging from her rearview mirror. "Natasha?" she asked, her voice carrying a soft accent I later learned was Salvadoran. "Yes," I said, opening the rear door and sliding into the back seat. "Heading to Bronzeville?" "Yes, please." She pulled into traffic, and we rode in comfortable silence. She did not ask intrusive questions or force conversation. She simply drove, navigating the empty streets with easy confidence. When she dropped me off 15 minutes later, she waited until I had unlocked my front door and stepped inside before driving away. I noticed that. The waiting. Over the following weeks, something unusual happened. Nearly every time I requested a ride, Camilla was the one who accepted. I later learned that rideshare algorithms favor drivers who consistently work certain areas at certain times. Camilla worked the downtown to south side corridor between midnight and 4 a.m., 5 nights a week. We were matched by routine. She never pried into my life. She never asked why I worked so late, or why I always looked so tired. But she noticed things. She noticed when I seemed shaken after a particularly long shift. She noticed when I shivered despite my coat. She noticed when I was unusually quiet, even for me. In early October, I started bringing her coffee. It began simply enough. The break room at Sentinel had a coffee maker that produced something barely resembling coffee, but it was hot and caffeinated. I started making 2 cups instead of 1, pouring the second into an insulated travel mug I kept in my bag. The first time I handed Camila the cup, she looked genuinely startled. "You do not have to do this," she said softly. "I know," I replied, "but the nights are long for both of us, and this coffee is terrible, so we might as well suffer together. She laughed at that, a real laugh that lit up her tired face. She accepted the cup with both hands, like it was something precious. Thank you, Natasha. Truly. That small gesture became a ritual. Every night, 2 cups of awful coffee, one for me, one for Camila. We rarely talked during those first weeks, but the silence between us was comfortable, the kind of quiet that exists between people who understand that sometimes presence is enough. By mid-October, those 15-minute drives home became the only real human interaction I had, outside of work emails and Emma's Sunday phone calls. I started looking forward to seeing Camila's car pull up, to handing her the coffee, to the way she always asked, "How was your night?" and actually waited for an answer. Camila remembered details about me. She remembered that I hated small talk, but loved when she told stories about her 2 daughters, Isabella and Sophia, ages 12 and 9. She remembered which streets had the worst potholes after a rainstorm, and always took the smoother route. She remembered the night I mentioned Rebecca in passing, describing her as my wife who died, and Camila had simply said, "I am sorry for your loss," without the awkward stumbling that usually followed when people learned I was a widow and a lesbian. What I did not know during those early weeks was that Camila was paying attention to more than just me. She was noticing patterns in her other passengers too. She was listening to conversations people thought were private, logging details people assumed would disappear into the night. And she was starting to hear my name in places I had never been. If you feel my words, show your support by liking the video and subscribing to the channel. And tell me from which city you belong, so I can see how far a woman's impactful voice can reach. Help me build this community, so we can bring more truthful stories for you. In late October, strange things began happening at work. Small things at first, easy to dismiss. A file I had logged the previous week would be missing from its assigned location. Digital timestamps on documents would not match the physical check-in dates. Backup files that should have existed in the system simply were not there. I brought these discrepancies to my supervisor, a stern woman named Margaret Chen, who had worked at Sentinel for 15 years. Margaret was in her 60s, wore reading glasses on a beaded chain, and ran the night shift with military precision. "Are you certain you logged them correctly?" she asked, peering at me over her glasses. "Yes," I said, showing her my handwritten notes. I still kept a physical log, an old journalism habit. These 3 files were all checked in on October 18th, but the digital system shows no record of them existing. Margaret frowned, tapping her pen against the desk. "That is unusual. I will look into it." 3 days later, she called me into her office. "Natasha, I need you to start a more detailed audit," she said quietly. "Do not make it obvious, but I want you to cross-reference every file you handle against both the physical inventory and the digital records. Note any discrepancies, no matter how small. Do not discuss this with anyone else on staff. Bring your findings directly to me." "Is something wrong?" I asked. Margaret's expression was carefully neutral. "I am not sure yet, but your journalism background makes you more observant than most. If something is off, you will find it." So, I started digging deeper, approaching my work with the investigative instincts I had not used in years. I began noticing patterns. Certain types of files were more likely to have discrepancies. Specifically, files related to corporate compliance, vendor contracts, and financial settlements. The missing or altered documents shared another commonality. They were all several years old, past the point where clients regularly requested them, but not old enough to be transferred to deep storage or destroyed per retention policies. They existed in a liminal space where their absence might not be noticed for months or years. I started staying late on Tuesdays and Fridays, the nights when the building was quietest, when even the security guards seemed to disappear for long stretches. I would pull files, photograph pages with my phone, compare them against digital records, and document every inconsistency in my physical notebook. I never brought files home. Everything stayed locked in the building, but I did bring my notebook home. It was just a standard legal pad, filled with file numbers, dates, and cryptic notes only I could decipher. I kept it on my kitchen counter, next to my coffee maker. One Tuesday night in early November, I stayed until nearly 3 in the morning, working through a box of vendor contracts from 2019. When I finally left the building, Camila was waiting, as always. I climbed into the back seat, handed her the coffee, and let out a long exhale. "Rough night?" she asked. "Confusing night," I said. "I am finding things at work that do not make sense. Files that should exist, but do not. Records that have been changed." Camila glanced at me in the rearview mirror. "That sounds serious. Maybe it is just disorganization. I am probably seeing patterns that are not there." "You were a journalist, yes?" Camila asked. "You told me once. A long time ago." "Journalists see patterns that others miss," she said. "Trust your instincts." I smiled tiredly. "My instincts are rusty. Instincts do not rust," Camila said quietly. "They just wait for when you need them." I thought about that as we drove through the empty streets. About instincts, about patterns, about the feeling I could not shake. That something was deeply wrong at Sentinel Archives. What I did not know was that Camila was having the same feeling. But her concern was not about files or documents. Her concern was about me. Because 3 weeks earlier, she had picked up a passenger named Marcus Leland, a man in his early 50s who worked in corporate security. He was drunk, angry, and talking too loudly on his phone about problems at work, about an audit that was causing complications, about files that needed to disappear before someone figured out what they revealed. And 2 weeks after that, she picked him up again. This time, he was complaining about some woman in records who asks too many questions. Camila had not connected it to me at first. Chicago was full of women who worked in records. But then, during his third ride, Marcus had said something that made her blood run cold. "She works nights, South Side, lives alone. If she has taken anything home, I will find it." Camila had asked casually, "Who are you talking about?" Marcus had laughed, that mean drunk laugh. "Nobody important, just someone who doesn't know when to mind her own business." After that ride, Camila had started taking notes, not because she was paranoid, but because 10 years earlier she had ignored warning signs, and someone she loved had died because of it. She was not going to make that mistake again. Now, as November deepened and the nights grew colder, Camila watched me carefully. She noticed that I looked more tired each week. She noticed that I started checking over my shoulder before getting into her car. She noticed the tension in my voice when I talked about work. And she noticed the black sedan that had started appearing on my street. The first time she saw it, she thought it was a coincidence, just another car parked on a residential block. But the second time, she noticed it was parked in the same spot, 3 houses down from mine. The third time, she memorized the license plate. It belonged to Marcus Leland. Camila did not tell me right away. She was not sure yet. She needed to be certain before she frightened me. Before she disrupted my life, with suspicions that might be unfounded. But she started documenting everything. She started recording her rides with passengers who mentioned audits, records, or investigations. The Rideshare app's terms of service included consent for audio recording, for driver safety. Most passengers never read the fine print. Most passengers never imagined their drunken rants would become evidence. By the second week of November, Camila had documented 8 rides with Marcus Leland. She had recordings of him discussing the woman who is a problem, talking about handling it before it escalates, mentioning my street name multiple times, discussing my work schedule like he had memorized it. She also noticed something else. The security company Marcus worked for, Titan Security Solutions, had contracts with multiple buildings downtown, including the building that housed Sentinel Archives. Marcus Leland had keys to my workplace. He had access to the very files I was auditing, and based on his increasingly agitated phone conversations during his rides, he knew I was getting close to something he needed to stay buried. She would tell me everything, but she needed to do it carefully, in a place where we would not be overheard, where I could process the information without immediately panicking. She would tell me on the night of November 14th. But before she could execute her plan, something else happened that accelerated everything. On November 13th, I came home to find my back gate unlatched. The gate was old, with a rusted latch that stuck, but I was certain I had locked it that morning. I stood in my small backyard, staring at the gate, trying to convince myself I had simply forgotten. Then I went inside and noticed my kitchen counter looked different. Not obviously disturbed, but subtly rearranged. My coffee maker was turned slightly, and my legal pad, the one with all my notes from work, was gone. I tore through my house looking for it. I checked every room, every drawer, every bag. It was not there. The legal pad that contained weeks of documentation about missing files, altered records, and patterns I had been tracking had simply disappeared. I told myself I must have left it at work. I must have misplaced it. I must have accidentally thrown it away. But deep in my gut, I knew better. Someone had been in my house. Someone had taken my notes. That night, when Camilla picked me up from work, I must have looked shaken because she immediately asked what was wrong. "I think someone was in my house," I said quietly. Camilla's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "Why do you think that?" I told her about the gate, about the rearranged counter, about the missing legal pad. As I talked, I watched her expression in the rearview mirror. She looked grim, like she had been expecting this. "Natasha," she said carefully, "has anyone at work been asking about your audit, about what you've found?" "No. I only report to my supervisor." "Why?" Camilla was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "Because I think we need to talk. Really talk. Somewhere private." "About what?" "About the man who has been watching your house. About the things he says when he thinks no one is listening. About why I think you are in danger." My stomach dropped. "What are you talking about?" "Not here," Camilla said. "Not on your street. Tomorrow night, after I pick you up, we are going somewhere we can talk without being seen. And Natasha, I need you to trust me, please." I looked at her reflection in the mirror. Her expression was deadly serious. "Okay," I whispered. "I trust you." That night, I barely slept. I kept hearing phantom sounds, footsteps that were not there, doors opening that remained closed. I got up 3 times to check the locks. I stood at my bedroom window, looking out at the dark street, and I saw it. A black sedan, parked 4 houses down. Engine off, lights off. Someone sitting in the driver's seat, watching. I backed away from the window, my heart hammering in my chest. I thought about calling the police, but what would I say? Someone is sitting in a parked car on a public street? They would think I was paranoid, a grief-stricken widow, imagining threats that did not exist. But I knew better. My journalist instincts, those rusty instincts Camilla said never really disappeared, were screaming at me. And whatever it was, it had followed me home. The next night, November 14th, I walked out of Sentinel Archives at 2 in the morning with my hands shaking. The coffee I had made for Camilla sloshed in the travel mug as I approached her car. She was already there, waiting, but tonight, something in her expression told me everything was about to change. I climbed into the back seat and handed her the coffee. She took it, set it in the cup holder, and pulled into traffic. But instead of turning toward my neighborhood, she stayed straight, heading west into an industrial area I did not recognize. "Camilla," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "where are we going?" "Somewhere we can talk, without being seen." And that is when I knew this was not paranoia. This was not grief-induced anxiety. This was real. I was in danger, and somehow my rideshare driver had become the only person standing between me and something I did not yet understand. The something that wanted me to disappear. Camilla drove for 10 minutes without speaking, navigating through industrial streets lined with warehouses and closed factories. The area was deserted at this hour, lit only by occasional security lights that cast long shadows across empty loading docks. Finally, she pulled into an abandoned parking garage beneath a building that looked like it had been vacant for years. The fluorescent lights overhead flickered weakly, some completely dead, creating pockets of darkness between pools of sickly yellow light. Camilla parked in a far corner, away from the entrance ramp, and killed the engine. The sudden silence was deafening. She turned in her seat to face me fully. In the dim light, I could see the tension in her jaw, the worry in her eyes. "Natasha, I need you to stay calm while I tell you what I know," she said quietly. "Can you do that?" My heart was racing. "You are scaring me." "I know, I am sorry, but what I have to tell you would scare you more if I said it on your street, where he might be watching." "Where who might be watching?" Camila pulled out her phone, unlocked it, and opened her notes app. The screen was filled with entries, dates and times, and short paragraphs, written in careful detail. "Do you know a man named Marcus Leland?" she asked. The name sent electricity through my nervous system. "I have seen that name, in files at work, corporate security contracts." "Why?" "Because I have driven him 11 times in the last 2 months, Camila said. "And during those rides, he has said things that made me start documenting everything he says." She handed me the phone. I scrolled through the entries, my hands beginning to shake. October 22nd, 11:47 p.m. Passenger Marcus Leland. Pickup downtown. Drop off Lincoln Park. Drunk, agitated, on phone entire ride. Talking about an audit causing problems. Files that should not have been flagged. Someone asking too many questions. Mentioned night shift multiple times. October 29th, 12:35 a.m. Marcus Leland again. Very drunk. Complained about some woman in records who does not know when to stop. Said she works alone, works late. Mentioned needing to handle this before it goes further. November 5th, 1:15 a.m. Marcus Leland, third ride. Talked on phone about finding out where she lives. Mentioned South Side. Lives alone. Probably takes work home. Said if she has copies or notes, they would be at her house. I looked up at Camila, my mouth dry. "This could be about anyone." "Keep reading," she said quietly. November 8th, 11:52 p.m. Marcus Leland. Said specific address during phone call. "Yeah, the one with the blue door on East 47th Place. The townhouse with the broken porch light. That was my address. My exact address." I felt dizzy. "There is more," Camila said gently. November 12th, 1:28 a.m. Marcus Leland. Mentioned Tuesdays and Fridays she stays late those nights. House empty until past 2. This is Natasha's schedule. I am certain now he is talking about her. November 13, 12:44 a.m. Marcus Leland. Phone call mentioned, tonight, checking if she keeps anything at home. Said just looking, not touching, not yet. My vision blurred. That was the night I had come home to find my gate unlatched, my counter disturbed, my legal pad missing. "He was in my house," I whispered. "Yes," Camila said. "I think he was." "But how? I locked everything." "Natasha, what does Marcus Leland do for work?" I thought back to the files I had seen. He works for Titan Security Solutions. They provide contract security for corporate buildings, including your building. The realization hit me like cold water. Yes, he covers overnight shifts at Sentinel. He started about 6 weeks ago. Camila nodded grimly. "So he has keys, he has access codes, he knows your schedule. He probably has access to employee records, which means he knows your home address, your emergency contacts, everything." I covered my mouth, fighting nausea. "Why? Why is he watching me?" "Because you are auditing files," Camila said. "And I think you have found something, or he thinks you have. Something worth protecting, something worth hiding." I thought about the patterns I had been documenting, the missing vendor contracts, the altered payment records, the discrepancies in compliance filings. At the time, I thought I was uncovering simple fraud, maybe some kickback scheme, or embezzlement. But if Marcus was involved, if he was willing to break into my home, to watch me, to learn my schedule, then this was bigger than I had realized. "I do not have proof of anything," I said desperately. "Everything I found is still at the office. I never brought files home." "But he doesn't know that," Camila said. "He thinks you might have copies. He thinks your notes might have details that could expose whatever scheme he is protecting." "I had notes," I said, my voice cracking. "A legal pad where I documented everything. File numbers, dates, discrepancies. It was on my kitchen counter." Now it is gone. Camilla's expression darkened. That confirms it. He was looking for exactly that. And now that he has your notes, he knows what you know. He knows you are onto something. But I do not even fully understand what I found, I said. I flagged inconsistencies, but I didn't investigate further. I didn't accuse anyone of anything. It doesn't matter, Camilla said. And Natasha, there is something else. She scrolled to a more recent entry on her phone. November 14th, 10:55 p.m. Marcus Leland. Most concerning ride yet. Phone call mentioned, tonight is good, she works late Thursdays, house empty until after 2. Said this time I am prepared, this time I will handle it properly. Mentioned having zip ties just in case she shows up. The word zip ties made my blood turn to ice. Tonight, I whispered. He is planning something for tonight. Yes, Camilla said. And before I picked you up, I drove past your street. His car was parked 2 houses down from yours. Engine warm. Like he was waiting. The parking garage suddenly felt too small, too exposed. We have to call the police. We will, Camilla said. But I needed you to see this first, to understand this is not paranoia. This is real, it is documented, and you are in immediate danger. She started the car and pulled out of the parking garage. As we drove toward the nearest police station, I tried to process everything. My mind kept circling back to one question. Why did you start paying attention to him? I asked. There must be dozens of drug passengers who say strange things. Camilla was quiet for a moment. When she spoke, her voice was thick with emotion. 10 years ago, I had a best friend named Sophia. We grew up together in El Salvador, came to America together, lived 3 blocks apart in Pilsen. She started dating a man who seemed nice at first, then became controlling. When she broke up with him, he started showing up places she went. Following her, watching her apartment. Camilla's hands tightened on the steering wheel. Sophia told me she was scared. She said she thought he was dangerous, and I told her she was being paranoid. I told her he was just hurt about the breakup, that he would move on. I did not take her seriously. What happened? I asked, though part of me already knew. 2 weeks later, he broke into her apartment while she was sleeping. She fought back. She tried to run. He stabbed her 17 times. I felt tears burn my eyes. She died in the ambulance, Camilla continued, her voice barely above a whisper. And I spent the next 10 years knowing I could have prevented it. If I had just listened, if I had just paid attention, if I had just believed her when she said she was in danger. Camilla, that was not your fault. Maybe not legally, she said. But morally, I failed her. So I promised myself I would never ignore warning signs again. When I started driving, I started really listening to passengers. And after the 3rd time Marcus mentioned an audit and a woman who worked nights, I started writing everything down. When he said your address, I knew it was you. And I decided I would not make the same mistake twice. We pulled into the parking lot at the 2nd District Police Station. The building was lit up, busy even at this hour. You saved my life, I said. You gave me coffee every night, Camilla replied, turning to look at me. You treated me like a person, not just a driver. So, when I heard your address come out of his mouth, there was no way I was going to let you disappear. We walked into the police station together, and I told my story to a desk sergeant who looked tired and skeptical until Camilla started playing the recordings on her phone. Marcus Leland's voice filled the sterile waiting area, slurred and menacing. She does not know what she is looking at yet, but once she figures it out, this whole thing collapses. I need to get ahead of this, need to clean it up before someone higher up notices. The desk sergeant's expression changed. He called for a detective immediately. Detective Maria Ortiz arrived within minutes. She was in her mid-40s, sharp-eyed, with graying hair pulled back in a tight bun. She led us to an interview room and listened without interrupting as I explained everything. My job at Sentinel Archives, the audit I had been conducting, the missing files, the pattern of discrepancies in vendor contracts and compliance documents. Then Camilla showed her the notes, the dated entries, the detailed observations. Detective Ortiz's expression grew more serious with each entry she read. When Camilla played the recordings, especially the most recent one mentioning tonight and zip ties, Detective Ortiz stood up abruptly. "Excuse me," she said, stepping out of the room. Through the small window in the door, I could see her making urgent phone calls, gesturing to other officers. Within minutes, the station came alive with activity. Officers moved quickly, voices raised, radios crackling. Detective Ortiz returned with another detective, an older man with silver hair and a weathered face, who introduced himself as Detective James Kowalski.
"Miss Winters," he said, sitting across from me. "The name Marcus Leland is familiar to us. He has been on our radar for other reasons."
"Can you tell me exactly what you have been auditing at Sentinel Archives?" I explained in detail. The vendor contracts that listed companies I could not verify through state business registrations. The payment invoices that showed services rendered, but no corresponding delivery confirmations. The compliance documents that have been altered after initial filing, with changes so subtle I almost missed them. "What types of companies?" Detective Kowalski asked. "Maintenance services, document shredding, IT support, security consulting, all contracted through Sentinel's parent company, Vanguard Business Services." Detective Kowalski exchanged a look with Detective Ortiz. "How much money are we talking about?" "Based on what I have documented so far, probably between $800,000 and $1 million over the past 3 years. But I was only assigned to audit a specific segment. There could be more." "Who at Sentinel knows about your findings?" "Just my supervisor, Margaret Chen. I report directly to her. She is the one who asked me to document everything." Detective Kowalski leaned forward. "Ms. Winters, Sentinel Archives is owned by Vanguard Business Services, which is a subsidiary of a larger holding company called Fortress Consolidated. We have been investigating Fortress for the past 18 months on suspicion of money laundering through shell companies and fraudulent service contracts." My stomach dropped. I did not know that. I just work night audit. "And you accidentally stumbled into the middle of a federal investigation," Detective Ortiz said, not unkindly. "The problem is, you did it without protection, without knowing what you were walking into. And now the people involved know you are asking questions." "How do they know?" I asked. "Because Marcus Leland is not just contract security. He is an enforcer, someone who fixes problems, someone who makes witnesses disappear or become too scared to talk." The room seemed to tilt. "Are you saying he has hurt people before?" "We have suspected it, but we have never been able to prove it. Witnesses recant, evidence disappears, people suddenly move out of state and refuse to cooperate. If you feel my words, show your support by liking the video and subscribing to the channel. And tell me from which city you belong, so I can see how far a woman's impactful voice can reach. Help me build this community so we can bring more truthful stories for you." Detective Ortiz stood. "We need to move quickly. Ms. Winters, you are not going home tonight. We are placing you in protective custody immediately. Miss Rodriguez, thank you for bringing this to our attention. You may have prevented a homicide." Everything moved very fast after that. Officers were dispatched to my house. An unmarked car was sent to watch Camilla's apartment, in case Marcus decided she was also a problem. I was taken to a small hotel on the north side, one the police used for witnesses who needed protection. As they led me out of the station, I grabbed Camilla's hand. "Please be careful, if he finds out you were documenting everything." "I will be fine," Camilla said, though I could see fear in her eyes. "My ex-husband is a Chicago police officer. He will make sure my daughters are safe. But you, Natasha, you need to stay hidden until they arrest him." "Thank you," I said, my voice breaking. "Thank you for seeing me, for listening, for giving a damn when you didn't have to." Camilla hugged me tightly. "You gave me a second chance," she whispered. "A chance to save someone this time. Thank you for that." They separated us then. A female officer drove me to the hotel while Detective Ortiz followed in her own vehicle. The hotel was modest but clean, the kind of place that rented rooms by the week to people who needed to disappear for a while. Detective Ortiz gave me her card and a burner phone. "Do not call anyone from your regular phone," she said. "Not even your daughter. Not yet. We will contact her and explain the situation, but we need to keep your location completely confidential. Marcus Leland has access to police scanners and probably has contacts in various departments. The fewer people who know where you are, the safer you will be." "How long do I have to stay here?" I asked. "We have units moving on his location right now. We are executing search warrants for his apartment, his vehicle, and his work locker at Titan Security. Based on Ms. Rodriguez's recordings alone, we have enough for multiple charges, but I want him in custody before you go anywhere." She paused at the door. "Ms. Winters, what you uncovered could be part of something much larger. Federal investigators will want to talk to you. Your testimony could help us dismantle an entire network of corporate fraud and money laundering. But right now, my only concern is keeping you alive. So please, stay in this room. Do not answer the door for anyone except me or an officer you can verify through the number I gave you. Understand?" "Yes." After she left, I sat on the bed and stared at the blank walls. The room smelled like industrial cleaner and stale cigarettes someone had tried to mask with air freshener. I thought about my townhouse, about whether Marcus was there right now, searching through my things, looking for evidence I did not have. I thought about what would have happened if Camilla had not been paying attention, if she had just driven me home like I expected. I would have walked through my front door, turned on the lights, and found him waiting. The zip ties. My stomach lurched, and I barely made it to the bathroom before vomiting. For 3 hours, I sat in that hotel room, jumping at every sound in the hallway, watching the clock, waiting for news. At 6 in the morning, my burner phone rang. "Ms. Winters, this is Detective Ortiz. I wanted to update you. We apprehended Marcus Leland approximately 30 minutes ago." Relief flooded through me. "Where was he?" "In his vehicle 2 blocks from your house. He had a bag with him containing lockpicks, gloves, zip ties, duct tape, and a knife. He also had a handgun that he is not licensed to carry." My hands shook so badly I almost dropped the phone. Based on his location, his possession of burglary tools, and Ms. Rodriguez's recordings, we have charged him with stalking, attempted burglary, possession of burglary tools, and unlawful possession of a firearm. The state's attorney is reviewing the case for additional charges, including conspiracy and witness intimidation. Is he in jail? Yes. Bond hearing is tomorrow morning. Given the evidence and his access to financial resources through his criminal network, we will be requesting he be held without bail. You are safe, Ms. Winters. I started crying, great heaving sobs that came from somewhere deep in my chest. "Thank you," I managed. "Thank you." "Get some rest," Detective Ortiz said gently. "I will call you later this afternoon with more information." After we hung up, I lay on the hotel bed and cried until I had no tears left. I cried for Rebecca, who I missed so much it physically hurt. I cried for the life I thought I was living, the quiet grief I thought was my biggest problem. I cried for how close I had come to not surviving this. And I cried in gratitude for a rideshare driver who gave a damn about the woman who brought her coffee. Around noon, Detective Ortiz called again. This time, her voice carried a different weight. "Ms. Winters, we searched Marcus Leland's apartment and vehicle. What we found is significant." "What did you find?" "Hundreds of documents. Corporate files, compliance reports, audit records that should have been in secure storage at Sentinel Archives. He had been systematically removing original documents and replacing them with altered versions. We also found a laptop with detailed financial records showing a fraud scheme involving shell companies, false vendor contracts, and money laundering that totals over $6 million. I could not breathe. $6 million. I had thought it was maybe $1 million at most. "It gets worse," Detective Ortiz continued. "Marcus kept records of everything, almost like insurance. Notes about who was involved, who knew what, who was complicit. Your supervisor, Margaret Chen, is mentioned extensively." "Margaret?" I said, stunned. She's the one who asked me to audit the files. She's the one who wanted documentation. Yes, and based on Marcus's notes, she asked you to document it because she was planning to use you as a scapegoat. The plan was to let you uncover enough to build a case, then frame you for stealing the documents, and expose you as the one behind the fraud. Marcus was supposed to plant evidence in your home, make it look like you were the embezzler. The room spun. But I did not do anything. We know that. But if Marcus had succeeded tonight, if he had planted those documents in your home and then tipped off authorities, you would have been arrested. Your fingerprints are all over the legitimate files because that is your job. It would have looked credible, at least initially. And I would have been discredited, I said slowly. Anything I said about patterns I found would have looked like me trying to deflect blame. Exactly. You stumbled into the middle of a conspiracy, and instead of trying to buy your silence, they decided to destroy your credibility permanently. Marcus's job was to plant evidence, then either scare you into staying quiet about what you found, or make sure you were not around to talk at all. I felt sick. How many people are involved? Based on what we have found so far, at least 12. Marcus Leland, Margaret Chen, 3 other Sentinel employees, 4 executives at Vanguard Business Services, and several people at shell companies that were receiving fraudulent payments. The FBI is taking over the financial crimes portion of the investigation. You will need to give a full statement to federal investigators. When? Tomorrow, if you are up for it. For now, I want you to stay where you are. We will be making additional arrests over the next 24 hours. Some of the people involved have significant resources and connections. I do not want them knowing where you are until everyone is in custody. Can I call my daughter? She must be terrified. Sunday was 2 days ago, and we always talk on Sundays. Yes, but only on the burner phone I gave you. Do not tell her your location. Just tell her you are safe, and that police are protecting you. We have already contacted her to let her know you are okay, but I'm sure she would like to hear your voice. After we hung up, I called Emma. She answered on the first ring. Oh my God, Mom, are you okay? The police called and said you were in protective custody, and I have been out of my mind. I am okay, sweetheart. I am safe. What happened? They would not give me details, just said you were a witness in a criminal investigation and that someone had threatened you. I told her everything, about the audit, about Camila and the recordings, about Marcus and the plan to frame me or worse. Emma listened in horrified silence. Mom, you should have told me things were strange at work. You should have called me. I did not know how strange they were, I said. I thought I was just finding clerical errors. I did not realize I was uncovering millions of dollars in fraud. When can you come home? Maybe in a few days, once they have arrested everyone involved. I'm flying out there, Emma said decisively. Today. I am not letting you go through this alone. Emma, you have Sophie and James. Marcus is with them. He took time off work. Mom, I am coming. You need me there. And suddenly, I was crying again. Because she was right. I did need her there. I needed my daughter. Needed to know I was not alone in this nightmare. Okay, I whispered. Okay. I love you, Mum. And I am so grateful you are alive. I am so grateful your driver was paying attention. Me too, baby. Me too. Emma arrived in Chicago the next evening. Detective Ortiz arranged for her to be brought to my hotel through a secure route. When she walked through the door, I collapsed into her arms and we held each other and cried. She was 42 years old, with Rebecca's eyes and my stubborn chin. And in that moment, she was both my daughter and my anchor to reality. We spent the evening talking, really talking, in a way we had not since before Rebecca died. Emma told me how scared she had been, how guilty she felt for not checking on me more often, for not realizing how isolated I had become. I thought you wanted space, she said. I thought calling every Sunday was enough. I didn't know you were struggling this much. I didn't know I was struggling this much either, I admitted. Grief is strange. You think you are managing, and then you realize you have just been surviving. Well, no more, Emma said firmly. When this is over, things change. Maybe you move to Seattle. Maybe we visit more. Maybe we actually talk more than once a week. But Mum, you are not alone anymore. I am here. I am not going anywhere. I squeezed her hand, grateful beyond words. The next morning, FBI agents arrived at the hotel to take my statement. I spent 4 hours walking them through everything I had discovered during my audit, showing them my documentation process, explaining the patterns I had noticed. They recorded everything, asked detailed questions, treated me not as a victim, but as a valuable witness. One of the agents, a woman named Special Agent Chen, no relation to Margaret, explained that my findings had connected directly to a larger investigation they had been conducting into corporate fraud networks in the Midwest. Your audit broke this case wide open, she said. Without your documentation, we might never have had enough to prosecute. You should be proud. But I did not feel proud. I felt exhausted and traumatized and angry that doing my job correctly had nearly gotten me killed. Over the next week, 12 people were arrested. Marcus Leland, Margaret Chen, 3 other Sentinel employees who had been complicit in the document alteration scheme, and 6 executives at various companies involved in the money laundering operation. The Chicago Tribune ran a front-page story about the arrests, describing it as one of the most complex corporate fraud schemes in Illinois history. My name was not mentioned in the article, which Detective Ortiz said was for my safety. But Camila's role was highlighted. Rideshare drivers' vigilance may have prevented homicide, read one headline. Reporters tried to contact Camila, but she refused all interviews. She told me later that she did not do it for attention. She did it because it was the right thing to do, because she had failed to do it once before, and because I had treated her like a human being instead of invisible labor. They let me return home after 8 days. The locks had been changed, courtesy of the Chicago Police Department's Victim Services Program. A security system had been installed, cameras covering the front door, back door, and small yard. The officers who escorted me home walked through every room, checked every closet, made sure everything was secure before leaving me alone. Emma stayed with me for 2 weeks. We cleaned the house together, room by room, reclaiming the space that had been violated. We threw out anything that felt tainted by Marcus's presence. We rearranged furniture, painted walls, put up new curtains. Slowly, the townhouse started to feel like mine again, instead of a crime scene. Camila visited often, sometimes with her daughters Isabella and Sophia, sometimes alone. We would sit in my kitchen drinking coffee, the ritual that had saved my life, now transformed into something deeper. Friendship forged in crisis, gratitude mixed with understanding. One afternoon, Camila told me more about the friend she had lost, Sophia Mendoza. They had been inseparable growing up in San Salvador, 2 girls who dreamed of coming to America and building better lives. When civil war made El Salvador too dangerous, Camila's family immigrated first. She worked 3 jobs to save enough money to bring Sophia over 2 years later. They lived in Pilsen, worked at the same restaurant, shared an apartment, were closer than sisters. When Sophia started dating a man named Eduardo, Camila had been happy for her at first, but Eduardo became controlling, demanding, violent. When Sophia finally gathered the courage to leave him, Eduardo started stalking her. She told me she was afraid, Camila said, staring into her coffee cup. She said he was watching her apartment, following her to work, calling her in the middle of the night. And I told her he was just having trouble accepting the breakup. I told her to give him time to move on. I did not believe her when she said she thought he might hurt her. Camila's voice broke. I told her she was being paranoid. Those exact words, "You are being paranoid, Sophia. He is not dangerous, he is just hurt." 2 weeks later, she was dead. Eduardo broke into her apartment at 3 in the morning, stabbed her 17 times, and left her to bleed out on her kitchen floor. Tears ran down Camila's face. "I found her," she whispered. I had a key to her apartment. When she did not show up for our breakfast plans and did not answer her phone, I went to check on her. I found her in a pool of blood, already cold. The police said she had been dead for hours, that if she had called them the first time she saw Eduardo outside her window, if someone had taken her seriously, she might still be alive. I reached across the table and took Camila's hand. For 10 years I carried that guilt, Camilla continued. I blamed myself for not listening, for dismissing her fear, for being the friend who did not believe her. I went to therapy, I went to support groups, I threw myself into work, into raising my daughters, into anything that kept me moving so I did not have to sit still with the guilt. And then you started driving, I said quietly. Yes, driving kept me in motion, kept me meeting people, kept me present. And I promised myself I would never again dismiss someone's fear, never again ignore warning signs. Never again be the reason someone did not survive. She looked at me with red-rimmed eyes. When I started hearing Marcus talk about a woman who worked nights, who lived alone, who was asking too many questions, I felt it in my gut, that same feeling I had ignored with Sophia. But this time, I listened to it. This time, I wrote everything down. This time, I refused to look away. You honored Sophia, I said. You did not let her death be meaningless. Maybe, Camilla said. Or maybe you gave me a reason to believe I could be better. You treated me with kindness, Natasha. You saw me as a person, not just a service. That made me care about you. And when I started hearing your address in a stranger's mouth, there was no way I was going to let history repeat itself. We sat in silence for a long moment, two women bound by trauma and survival, by the invisible threads that connect us when we choose to pay attention. I am writing about this, I said suddenly. Everything that happened. I think people need to hear it. Camilla nodded. Good. Tell them that paying attention is not paranoia. Tell them that kindness creates connections that can save lives. Tell them about Sophia, about how dismissing fear can be deadly. I will, I promised. The legal proceedings stretched over months. Marcus Leland was held without bail after prosecutors argued he was a flight risk and a danger to witnesses. His attorney tried to negotiate a plea deal, but federal prosecutors refused. They wanted to make an example of the entire network. The trial began in March, 5 months after that November night that had nearly ended my life. The courtroom was intimidating, all dark wood and stern faces, but Emma sat beside me every day. Camilla attended when she could, her presence a reminder of why I needed to be brave enough to testify. I took the stand on the 4th day of the trial. The prosecutor was a sharp woman in her 50s named Catherine Liu, who walked me through my employment at Sentinel Archives, the audit I had conducted, the patterns I had documented. I spoke clearly and calmly, keeping my eyes on the jury, explaining technical details in language anyone could understand. Then Catherine Liu asked me to describe the night Camilla told me I could not go home. She said she had been documenting things a passenger named Marcus Leland had said during his rides. Things about an audit, about a woman who worked nights, about my specific address. My voice wavered, but I pushed through. She said she had driven past my house and seen his car parked on my street. She said I was in danger. How did that make you feel? But also grateful, because I realized that without her paying attention, I would have walked into my house that night, without knowing someone was waiting for me. The defense attorney, a slick man in an expensive suit named Jonathan Berkowitz, tried to discredit Camilla during cross-examination. Is it not true that Miss Rodriguez was recording passengers without their explicit verbal consent? He asked. The rideshare app's terms of service include consent for audio recording. Catherine Liu objected immediately. But the passengers were not verbally informed at the start of each ride, were they? That is not required under Illinois law, Catherine countered. The judge agreed with the prosecution. The recordings were admissible. Berkowitz tried a different angle with me. Ms. Winters, you admit you never actually saw my client on your property, correct? Correct. You never saw him attempt to enter your home? Not that night, no. Then how can you be certain he intended you any harm? Perhaps he was simply parked on a public street. He had zip ties in his vehicle, I said evenly. Lockpicks, a knife, duct tape. He was not there to ask me directions. A few jurors smiled. Berkowitz's expression tightened. But you do not actually know what his intentions were, I know that he broke into my home on November 13th and stole my work notes. Police found my handwriting on documents in his apartment. I know that he was recorded saying he needed to handle me before I exposed the fraud scheme. I know that federal investigators found over $6 million in fraudulent transactions that I helped uncover. I know enough. Berkowitz did not have a good response to that. Camilla testified the next day. She was nervous, hands clasped tightly in her lap, but her voice was steady. She explained her background, her work as a rideshare driver, and why she had started documenting Marcus Leland's rides. I lost someone I loved because I did not pay attention to warning signs, she said quietly. I was not going to make that mistake again. Catherine Liu played the recordings in court. Marcus's voice filled the room, slurred and menacing, talking about the problem that needed to be handled, about my schedule, about tonight being the right time. The jury listened with rapt attention. A few looked genuinely horrified. When the recordings finished, Catherine asked Camilla one final question. Why did you get involved? You could have simply driven Miss Winters home and said nothing. Why risk your own safety? Camilla looked directly at the jury. Because she gave me coffee every night. Because she treated me like I mattered, like I was a person instead of just a service. And when someone shows you that kind of basic human kindness, you do not let them disappear. You protect them. That is what people should do for each other. The defense had no questions for Camilla. What could they possibly ask that would undermine that kind of moral clarity? The trial lasted 3 weeks. Margaret Chen testified against Marcus in exchange for a reduced sentence, admitting that she had recruited me specifically because I was thorough, because she knew I would document everything, and because the plan was to use me as a scapegoat. She cried on the stand, said she had been coerced by executives at Vanguard Business Services, claimed she was a victim too. I did not believe her. Neither did the jury. Marcus Leland was convicted on all counts: fraud, conspiracy, money laundering, stalking, attempted burglary, unlawful possession of a firearm, and witness intimidation. The judge sentenced him to 23 years in federal prison. Margaret Chen received 12 years. The other conspirators received sentences ranging from 6 to 15 years, depending on their level of involvement. When the verdicts were read, I felt something release inside my chest. Not relief exactly, but closure. The fear that had been coiled around my heart since that November night finally began to loosen its grip. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed us. Detective Ortiz had warned me they would be there. The case had received significant media attention, particularly the angle about a rideshare driver preventing a potential homicide. I gave a brief statement, thanking the detectives, the prosecutors, and Camilla. I spoke about the importance of trusting your instincts, of not dismissing someone's fear as paranoia, of creating communities where people look out for each other. A reporter asked her why she had gotten involved, why she had risked herself for a passenger she barely knew. Because ignoring people costs lives, Camilla said simply. Because 10 years ago, I ignored someone's fear, and she died. Because kindness creates connections, and connections create responsibility. I was responsible for Natasha the moment she treated me like I mattered. That is how it should work. Her words were quoted in newspapers across the country. Kindness creates connections, and connections create responsibility. It became a kind of rallying cry for people advocating for community-based safety networks. If you feel my words, show your support by liking the video and subscribing to the channel. And tell me from which city you belong, so I can see how far a woman's impactful voice can reach. Help me build this community so we can bring more truthful stories for you. The months after the trial were strange. Life did not simply return to normal because normal no longer existed. I could not go back to Sentinel archives, even if I wanted to. The company had been shut down pending federal investigation of all its client contracts and stored documents. Vanguard Business Services declared bankruptcy. Dozens of civil lawsuits were filed by clients whose documents had been compromised. I received a settlement offer from Vanguard's insurance company. compensation for the trauma and danger I had endured. My attorney, a fierce woman named Rachel Morrison who took my case pro bono, negotiated it up to an amount that made me gasp, enough to pay off my mortgage completely and live comfortably for years. "You deserve this," Rachel said when I expressed guilt about accepting so much money. "You nearly died doing your job correctly. They put a target on your back. This is not charity, it is restitution." With the financial pressure lifted, I had choices I had not had in years. I could retire if I wanted. I could travel, move closer to Emma, do anything. But I was not ready to stop working. I just wanted to work differently. I started consulting with small businesses and non-profit organizations, helping them build internal audit systems to protect against fraud. I taught workshops on financial oversight, documentation integrity, and how to recognize patterns that suggest intentional wrongdoing versus simple incompetence. My journalism background, combined with my auditing experience, made me uniquely qualified for this work. I could explain complex financial concepts in clear language. I could teach people to trust their instincts, while also backing them up with documented evidence. Camila often joined me at these workshops. She spoke about the importance of paying attention, of not dismissing gut feelings, of creating cultures where people felt safe reporting concerns. Together we became an unexpected team. The auditor and the driver. The woman who noticed patterns in numbers, and the woman who noticed patterns in people. We were interviewed for podcasts, local news segments, even a documentary about community safety and bystander intervention. Each time we told the same story with the same message. Ordinary people have extraordinary power when they choose to pay attention. The documentary, titled The Coffee and the Call, aired on PBS in October, nearly a year after that November night. Camila hosted a watch party at her apartment. Emma flew in from Seattle with Sophie and James. Detective Ortiz came, bringing homemade tamales. Camila's daughters invited their friends. My small living room was filled with people, with laughter, with the kind of community I had not realized I was building. We watched ourselves on screen, watched the reenactments of that night, watched interviews with prosecutors and FBI agents explaining how my audit had dismantled a multi-million-dollar fraud network. There was even an interview with Special Agent Chen, who said, "Ms. Winter's persistence and attention to detail, combined with Ms. Winter's persistence and attention to detail, was sailing into the common spaces of high intent with darker meaning." Rodriguez's willingness to document and report suspicious behavior represents the kind of community vigilance we need to prevent both financial crimes and violent crimes. When it ended, Camila's youngest daughter Sophia, named after the friend her mother had lost, looked up at me with wide eyes. "Tia Natasha, were you scared?" I thought about lying, about protecting her from the darkness, but I did not. "Yes, Mija, I was terrified, but your mum made sure I did not have to face that fear alone. She protected me when she did not have to, when it would have been easier to look away." Sophia looked at her mother with pride radiating from her face. "My mum is a hero." She pulled Sophia into her lap. "We are all heroes when we take care of each other," she said softly. "That is what makes us strong." It was a simple moment, but it carried the weight of everything we had survived, everything we had learned, everything we were trying to teach the next generation. Later that night, after everyone had gone home, I stood on my front porch and looked out at my street. The streetlights had finally been repaired. The sidewalks had been patched. The neighborhood was changing, slowly gentrifying in ways that made me both hopeful and sad. But my house still stood, still mine, no longer haunted by the man who had tried to take it from me. I thought about Rebecca, about how I wished she could have met Camila, how I wished she could have seen me survive this. Not because I had been brave, but because I had let someone help me, because I had stopped trying to carry grief and fear alone. My phone buzzed. A text from Emma. "Love you, Mom. So proud of you. So grateful you are still here." I typed back immediately. "Love you too, sweetheart. Always." Spring arrived slowly in Chicago, the way it always does. Snow melted into gray slush, then into puddles, then finally into the bright green of new grass pushing through last year's dead leaves. Camila and I started taking walks together on Sunday mornings, looping through Washington Park, talking about everything and nothing. One Sunday in April, Camila told me her son had reached out. She had not mentioned him before, only alluding once to having lost him in a different way than Sophia. "His name is Raphael," she said as we walked. "He is 34 now, living in San Diego. We have been estranged for 12 years. What happened?" Camila was quiet for a long moment, watching ducks paddle across the park's lagoon. "When Raphael was 22, his father, my ex-husband, became abusive. Not physically at first, but emotionally, financially. He controlled everything, decided everything. When I finally left him, Raphael was angry with me. He thought I was breaking up the family, that I was not trying hard enough to make it work. He did not understand what I was protecting him from." She wiped at her eyes. "Raphael stopped speaking to me. Chose his father's version of events over mine. For years, I tried to reach him, tried to explain. He would not listen. Eventually, I had to accept that I had lost my son." "What changed?" I asked gently. "The documentary. He saw it. He watched me talk about Sophia, about ignoring warning signs, about how paying attention can prevent violence. And he called me." Camila stopped walking, turning to face me with tears streaming down her face. "He said he understood now. He said he had started to see the same patterns in his father, the same control, the same manipulation. He said he was sorry for not believing me, for blaming me, for all the years we lost." I hugged her tightly as she sobbed against my shoulder. "We talked for 3 hours," Camila said when she could speak again. "He wants to meet Isabella and Sophia, his sisters he has not seen since they were babies. He wants to try to rebuild what we lost." "That is wonderful," I said, meaning it with my whole heart. "It is because of you," Camila said. "Because of this whole thing, because of telling our story. It made me brave enough to be honest about my past, about why I left, about what I survived. And it gave Raphael permission to see his father clearly for the first time. You were always brave," I said. "You just needed someone to witness it." We walked in silence for a while, the morning sun warm on our faces, the park coming alive with families and dogs, and the ordinary beauty of a city waking up. "Do you ever regret getting involved?" I asked. "Your life would have been simpler if you had just driven me home that night." Camila stopped again, looking at me seriously. "Simpler, maybe, but not better. You gave me a reason to trust myself again, Natasha. You reminded me that paying attention matters, that my instincts were worth believing in. I needed that as much as you needed me to act. We saved each other." I nodded, understanding in a way I had not fully grasped before. This was not a story about a driver who saved a passenger. This was a story about 2 women who had been broken by different traumas, who had found each other in the darkest hours, who had chosen to see each other's humanity, and in doing so, had reclaimed their own. As spring turned to summer, my life continued to expand in ways I had not anticipated. I started volunteering at a women's shelter on the West Side, teaching financial literacy classes to domestic violence survivors. Many of them had been economically controlled by their abusers, left without access to bank accounts, credit cards, or even basic knowledge of their own finances. I taught them how to read bank statements, how to build credit, how to recognize financial abuse and protect themselves. I taught them to document everything, to trust their instincts, to know that survival sometimes meant gathering evidence before making your escape. One woman, a soft-spoken 30-something named Elena with 3 children, approached me after class one evening. "Thank you," she said quietly. "Not just for teaching us this stuff, but for surviving, for showing us that it is possible to come out the other side." Her words cracked something open in me. I realized that survival was not just personal, it was communal. Every time I showed up, every time I shared my story, I was telling other women that the worst thing was not the end, that there was life after trauma, that we could rebuild ourselves from the wreckage. Camila joined me at the shelter sometimes, talking to women about safety planning, about trusting their instincts, about building support networks before they needed them. We worked well together, balancing practical advice with empathy, never minimizing their fear, but but also never making them feel powerless. One afternoon, as we left the shelter, Camila turned to me. "I have been thinking," she said. "What if we wrote a book?" I laughed. "About what?" "About this. About everything. About how paying attention saved your life. How kindness created connection. How two women who barely knew each other built something that mattered. About how corporate fraud and personal violence are connected by the same thread of unchecked power." I considered it. Would anyone want to read it? "Yes," Camila said firmly, "because everyone is afraid of something. Everyone has felt invisible or dismissed, or like their instincts do not matter. We can show them that paying attention is not paranoia, that kindness is not weakness, that survival is possible, even when danger hides inside your routine." So we started writing. Not a manual, not a self-help guide. Our story woven together from two perspectives, two types of vigilance, two forms of survival. We wrote in coffee shops and at my kitchen table and in Camila's living room while her daughters did homework. We wrote about fear and friendship, about grief and gratitude, about the invisible threads that connect us when we choose to see each other. It took us nearly 2 years to finish. We worked with an editor from a small independent press who specialized in true crime with a social justice angle. She helped us shape the narrative, balance the technical details of the fraud investigation with the emotional reality of surviving stalking and attempted violence. When we finally held the printed book in our hands, we both cried. The cover showed 2 coffee cups and a rearview mirror. The title was Vigilance: How Coffee and Courage Saved 2 Lives. We did not expect much, but the book found its audience. Women who had survived violence, women who had trusted their instincts, women who had been told they were overreacting, women who worked invisible jobs and felt unseen, women who understood that danger rarely announces itself, that it hides in routine and familiarity and the assumption that nothing bad will happen tonight. They wrote to us, hundreds of letters, emails, messages, thanking us, sharing their own stories, telling us about times they had listened to their gut and escaped harm, or times they had ignored it and paid the price. One letter came from a college student in Atlanta named Keisha. She had been feeling uneasy about a maintenance worker in her apartment building who seemed to know her schedule too well, who always appeared when she was coming or going, who had once asked her detailed questions about her family and whether she lived alone. "I was going to ignore it," she wrote. "I was going to tell myself I was being paranoid, but then I read your book. I reported him to building management, and they investigated. Turns out he had been arrested 3 years ago in another state for stalking. Because I spoke up, the building changed their screening policies for all contractors. You saved my life without ever meeting me. I read that letter dozens of times, each time feeling the weight of responsibility and possibility. Our story had not just been ours. It had become a template, a permission slip for women to trust themselves. Camila and I did book readings at libraries, community centers, women's organizations, and even some corporate offices that wanted to talk about creating cultures of accountability and safety. We spoke about that November night, about the coffee ritual that started a friendship, about the notes that became evidence, about how choosing to see each other had saved both our lives in different ways. And every time, we ended with the same message: pay attention, trust yourself, reach out. You are not alone. Create connections, protect each other. 3 years after that November night, Camila's oldest daughter Isabella graduated from high school. The ceremony was held at a large auditorium on the south side, filled with families and flowers and the buzz of celebration. I sat beside Camila, watching Isabella walk across the stage to receive her diploma, watching her beam with pride and possibility. Afterward, at the reception, Isabella found me. "Thank you for being part of our family, Tia Natasha," she said, hugging me tightly. "Thank you for letting me be part of it," I replied. She looked at me seriously. "You know what Mum told me? She said that when things were really hard, when she was still sad about Tia Sophia and felt like she had failed, you gave her a reason to believe she could protect someone again. She said you gave her purpose. Your mum gave me my life, I said. Literally.
I know, but you gave her something too.
You gave her forgiveness, even though she did not know she needed it. It was a startlingly perceptive thing for an 18-year-old to say. But Isabella had grown up watching her mother carry guilt, watching her transform it into vigilance, watching her save a stranger's life, and in doing so, save her own. That night, back at my townhouse, I sat on my back porch and looked up at the stars. They were faint through the city lights, but they were there. I thought about all the parallel universes that could have existed. The one where I never met Camila. The one where she ignored what she heard. The one where I walked through my door that November night and never walked out. But they also reminded me how fragile everything is, how quickly a life can pivot on a single choice, a single gesture, a single cup of coffee, offered without expectation of return. I thought about Rebecca, about how she would have loved Camila, how she would have insisted we all have Sunday dinners together every week. I thought about Emma and my grandchildren, about the life I almost missed with them. I thought about all the women still walking home alone, still feeling watched, still wondering if their fear is justified. And I thought about what I wanted my legacy to be. Not as a widow, not as a victim, not as a survivor, but as a woman who chose to transform trauma into action. The next morning, I called Camila. I have an idea, I said. Tell me. Something that connects women who need help with women who can provide it. A network for sharing safety information, reporting patterns, supporting each other. Not replacing police, but supplementing them, creating community-based vigilance. There was a pause, then Camila laughed, not with humor but with recognition. I have been thinking the exact same thing, she said. Let us do it. Within 6 months we had built it. A website, a mobile app, a hotline staffed by trained volunteers. We called it the Vigilant Sisters Network. Women could report feeling unsafe, share descriptions of people or vehicles that concerned them, connect with local resources, and find support from others who understood that fear was not weakness, but wisdom. The network grew faster than we ever anticipated. Women across the country started using it, sharing stories, warning each other. Patterns emerged. The same man following multiple women in different neighborhoods. The same vehicle appearing near different homes. The same person showing up in multiple women's stories, months or years apart. Law enforcement started paying attention. Several cases were opened based on information shared through our network. Restraining orders issued. Arrests made. Women protected. We were not perfect. We dealt with false reports, privacy concerns, jurisdictional complications. But we kept going, because the need was undeniable. One evening, 2 years after we launched the network, I received a message through the site. My name is Kara. I reported a man who kept appearing near my apartment, who seemed to know my schedule. Because of your network, 3 other women in my city came forward with similar experiences. Police investigated and found he had active warrants in 2 other states for stalking and assault. He was arrested last week. Thanked you for creating a space where I felt heard. You saved my life. I showed the message to Camila. She read it and wiped her eyes. This is what Sophia deserved, she said quietly. A world where people listen, where women are believed, where we protect each other. I nodded. We are building it, one story at a time, one connection at a time. As I approach 60, I am not the same woman I was when Rebecca died. I am not the same woman who stood alone in that hotel room, terrified and unmoored, wondering how my quiet life had become a crime scene. I am stronger now, but not because I survived violence. I am stronger because I learned to let people in, because I stopped believing that grief had to be carried alone, because I chose to transform the worst night of my life into a reason to build something better. Camila and I still have coffee every Sunday. Her daughters are growing into fierce, thoughtful young women who understand that paying attention is a form of love. Emma visits often, sometimes staying for weeks at a time, and my grandchildren FaceTime me almost daily to show me their art projects and tell me about their lives. I am building something I never thought I would have again. Community, purpose, families stitched together not by blood, but by choice and circumstance, and the decision to keep showing up for each other. The Vigilant Sisters Network now operates in 43 states. We have partnerships with domestic violence organizations, police departments, universities, and employers who want to create safer environments for women. We have trained over 3,000 volunteers to staff hotlines, review reports, and connect women with resources. We saved at least 200 documented lives in our first 3 years. 200 women who might have disappeared, who might have been harmed, who might have been told they were being paranoid. 200 women who were believed, protected, supported. And behind each of those numbers is a story. A woman who trusted her instincts, a friend who paid attention, a stranger who chose to help. A network that said, "We believe you. You are not alone. We will protect you." I carry my own story with me always, not as a burden, but as a compass. It reminds me that we are all more fragile and more resilient than we think. That danger hides in routine, but so does grace. That the smallest gestures, a cup of coffee, a moment of attention, a choice to listen, can change everything. I gave my rideshare driver coffee. She gave me my life. And together, we are trying to give that gift to as many women as we can. This is my story from Chicago. A story about corporate fraud and personal violence, about grief and friendship, about 2 women who chose to see each other when the world told them to look away. A story about how paying attention saved 2 lives and created a movement. I am Natasha Winters. I am 60 years old. I live in Chicago, in a townhouse in Bronzeville that is finally completely mine. I work as a consultant and advocate. I have coffee with my best friend Camila every Sunday. I call my daughter every evening. I see my grandchildren as often as I can. I am careful, but I am not afraid. I am vigilant, but I am not paranoid. I pay attention because attention is how we survive. I offer kindness because kindness creates connection. And connection, I have learned, is the most powerful form of protection we have. So if you are reading this, if you are listening, hear me clearly. Trust your instincts. They are not paranoia. They are wisdom accumulated from thousands of years of women learning to recognize danger. Document what feels wrong. Write it down. Photograph it. Tell someone. Do not dismiss your own fear. It exists to protect you.